They say the desert doesn't forget. Dustwind, New Mexico. Baked under the same sun that had scorched dreams into ash and bleached the bones of better folk than lived there now. The wind whispered down through the canyons, dry and sharp like it carried secrets, and no secret sat heavier on the town's shoulders than the one they had tried to bury years ago, Clara Granger. She lived beyond the ravine, where the prickly pears grew fat and mean, and the coyotes didn't howl so much as they watched. Folks claimed that land was cursed, same as they claimed she was. But Clara had never cursed anyone. She'd only ever tried to help, and for that, the village cast her out like a sickness they feared might spread. Back then, she had been the doctor's apprentice. She knew poultices that worked when prayers failed, set bones when the preacher called for patience instead of action. But all that ended when she saved the wrong child. Mayor Holt's daughter had come down with something fierce, fever so high her skin steamed. Clara mixed roots her mother once taught her about, whispered words in Spanish the town didn't like hearing, and by dawn the girl was sitting up. 3 days later, the fever came back, and the girl died before morning. They called it unnatural, said Clara had borrowed death, and it came to collect. The mayor turned his grief into wrath. The preacher fanned it into flame, and the town followed, same as always. They gave her 1 day to leave, and Clara left without a word, her satchel on one shoulder and a hawk circling above her like a lone sentinel. That was 6 years past. Now Dustwind had grown smaller, not larger. The mines dried up, the railroad curved elsewhere, and the young folk left unless they drank too much to walk straight. Sheriff Tom, once a wiry gunslinger with a badge, now limped with a knee gone stiff and a memory full of regrets. The preacher still spoke loud, but fewer came to hear. What remained were sunburnt men and wary women, and a town watching the horizon with the kind of dread that only came when dust clouds rose where no rain ever followed. The first fire came from over the ridge, a line of smoke across the sky, faint but steady. Then came the rider, a boy no older than 15, slumped on a horse half dead from gallop. Sheriff Tom caught him at the edge of town, bleeding from the shoulder and babbling about a gang. Cain's vultures, the boy rasped, eyes wide with something more than pain. Tore through El Fuego like wolves. Didn't take nothing but blood. Just burned and laughed. The name made the room go still. Not many had seen Silas Cain, but everyone knew what he was. A deserter turned butcher, his gang a trail of ash from Texas to Arizona. No one knew what he wanted, gold, maybe, or just a name that'd outlive him. The town held a meeting that night. The saloon emptied into the chapel, where folks sat shoulder to shoulder, sweat and fear clinging to them like a second skin. Sheriff Tom stood up front, looking older than he had that morning. "We ain't got the numbers to fight," he said. "A few rifles, some old pistols. Half our men haven't shot at anything that wasn't jackrabbit or bottle. But we also ain't got time to run." "We could send riders for help," someone said, "and wait a week." Tom shook his head. "We've got maybe 2 days. 3 if they're busy somewhere else." Then the mayor stood. His belly had grown even as the town shrank, and his voice boomed like he thought it still meant something. "There's one we haven't asked." No one said her name, but the silence did. "She knows herbs," the preacher muttered. "Not war." "She lived with a Comanche for a season," said a woman near the back. "Her mother was one of them. That knowledge runs deep." The mayor waved it off. "She was cast out for good reason. We beg her back now. We might as well say we were wrong." Sheriff Tom looked toward the chapel window, where the hills darkened with the fall of night. "Or we die proud and right. Ain't much of a choice." But no messenger rode to the ravine. At her shack, Clara saw the smoke and heard the boy's horse before he reached town. She watched from her high perch, spyglass in hand, tracking the fire trails over distant ridges. The desert told stories if you listened. Hoofbeats echoing off stone, scavenger birds circling above places too quiet. Trouble was coming, and Dustwind would face it unready. She hadn't set foot in that town since the day she left, but it hadn't stopped her from watching. Sometimes she treated a wandering ranch hand who wandered too far and too hurt. Sometimes she left tinctures at the edge of the creek for mothers too desperate to be proud. The town never thanked her. She never asked. That night, Clara lit one lamp and took down a map she had drawn on stitched leather. Arrows marked every trail in and out of Dustwind. Old cavalry notes. Her own additions. She spread it across the table and weighed the corners with stones. A sharp cry echoed outside. Her hawk returned, talons wet with something red, eyes unblinking. She knew what needed doing. But knowing didn't mean wanting. Clara gathered her tools. Not just herbs and needles this time, but iron. A revolver wrapped in oilcloth. A knife with a bone handle. A coiled length of rope. She hadn't used them in years, hadn't needed to. By the time dawn turned the sky to rust, Clara Granger had saddled her mule and packed 3 days' worth of food. She looked once at the town below, tents pitched, shadows moving like frightened ants, and then turned back into the canyon. Let them decide. She would not beg to be their shield. Not yet. The second fire came at dusk, a red bloom on the edge of sight, curling black against the horizon like a warning drawn in smoke. Dustwind stood still as it burned, doors barred, lamps unlit, prayers whispered like they might reach faster if spoken in silence. Sheriff Tom hadn't slept since the boys' arrival. He stood on the chapel steps, rifle in hand, scanning the hills with eyes that had once been sharp enough to pick off coyotes from 100 yards. Now they watered in the wind, and his fingers trembled when he reloaded. "They're testing us," he muttered to Deputy Lyle, a greenhorn with a patchy beard and a steady fear in his bones. "Burn a ranch, watch us sweat. Wolves nip before they tear." Lyle swallowed hard. "What do we do when they stop nipping?" Tom didn't answer. Outside town, in a crooked shack above the ravine, Clara crouched beside a cot, where the wounded rider lay restless in his fever. She'd drawn the arrow from his shoulder with the skill of someone who'd done it a dozen times, though this one had barbs meant to tear deeper, going out than in. He wasn't a boy, closer to 30, but the terror in his eyes was childlike. "They don't want gold," he whispered, shaking. "They take ears, fingers, leave them hanging by the ankles. 25 men, maybe more. Kane rides in a black duster, stitched with scalp braids. Don't look like a man. Looks like something born of thunder." Clara wiped sweat from his brow with a damp cloth. "Rest. You're safe here." But she knew safety was measured in hours. Back in town, the saloon had become a war room. Maps, mostly outdated, were scattered across card tables. The men gathered were few, storekeepers, farmers, boys too young, and old men past their prime. No soldiers. No strategy. Mayor Holt leaned over the largest map, red-faced and sweating. "We hold the center. Block the main road. Barricades here and here." "They'll ride around," said Sheriff Tom flatly. "They'll use the canyon. We'd be boxed in within minutes." "I'm not taking advice from a man who wants to drag a witch into our fight." Tom looked up sharply. "You'd rather die proud?" She was cast out. "She saved your daughter." The room fell quiet. "She failed to save her," Holt hissed. Tom stood slow, his voice calm but heavy. No one else even tried. The preacher crossed himself and shook his head. "If the Lord meant her to be our shield, he'd have kept her among us." "She ain't waiting on the Lord," Tom said. "She's waiting on us." They argued until voices cracked and fists slammed tables, but no messenger was sent. Fear bred stubbornness, the kind that got people killed. That night, a second ranch burned. The Richter place, 2 miles west. Flames painted the sky, while screams floated over the wind, muffled but unmistakable. By morning, the place was ash. Nothing left but a chimney and a child. A girl, maybe 6, covered in soot and blood that wasn't hers, was found crouched in a grain barrel. Clara had gotten there before anyone else. She'd heard the cries, saddled in the dark, and ridden like the ghosts of her past were chasing her. She found the child by lantern light, whispering to her dead dog. Clara scooped her up, bound a shallow knife wound, and left no trace of her presence except clean bandages and a line of sage ash across the threshold. The town woke to the girl's return. Her uncle, one of the few men willing to ride out, found her wandering back on foot. When he asked how she survived, she only said, "The Hawk Lady saved me." People didn't speak the name, but they looked toward the ravine more often that morning. Sheriff Tom rode out alone near noon. The canyon road snaked high, steep enough to break a horse's legs if taken wrong, but he reached the shack by sundown. Her hawk watched him from a fence post, feathers bristling. Clara stood outside, arms folded, knife at her belt. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't come to beg," Tom replied, swinging off his horse. "I came to ask." "That's new." He looked at her, really looked, at the lines around her eyes, the streaks of gray in her braid, the sun-split cracks in her knuckles. She hadn't softened out here. She'd sharpened. "They're coming fast. 2 more days, maybe less. And now you want the witch." "I want the woman who knew enough to draw a battle map 10 years ago, and who saved that child when no one else even knew she was alive." Clara said nothing. Her hands moved over a satchel, tying it closed with practiced ease. "I'm not riding in," she said, "but I'll give you something." Tom followed her inside, where she unrolled a piece of oilskin on the table, maps, hand-drawn, detailing the canyon's narrowest choke points, wind patterns, echoes that carried sound farther than bullets, and markers for traps made of little more than rope, pitch, and nerve. "I've tested these," she said. "They'll slow him down, maybe break him, but you'll need someone who knows how to lead them into it." Tom studied the drawings. "That someone won't be the mayor." "No," Clara said. "It won't." He folded the maps, tucked them in his coat. "They'll still come." "I know." He looked at her one last time, trying to read whatever sat behind her steady gaze. "You're not done yet, Clara. You never were." As he left, her hawk took flight, circling above the ravine like it was already scouting the war to come. Clara stood there until the dust from his horse faded. Then she turned back to her forge and struck flint to steel. Sparks flew, bright and brief in the dark. She wasn't riding in, but the war would ride to her. The sun rose blood orange over the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows that sliced through the Dustwind canyon like blades. The silence was taut, held breath before a scream. Somewhere out there, Silas Kane rode closer, and with him came the death wind. Clara stood waist-deep in brush at the canyon's mouth, palms stained with sap and grit. She worked with tireless precision, her fingers knotting rope around bent saplings and oil-soaked canvas. The traps she set weren't made for killing. They were made for stopping, stalling riders, just long enough to give the town a chance to fight or run. Her hawk wheeled overhead, its shrill cry echoing across the stone walls. That was the signal. A scout. Clara slipped deeper into the rocks, crouching low, her revolver loaded and slung at her hip. She watched the entrance of the canyon through a split in the stone, eyes narrowing. 1 rider, then 3, then 10. Kane's gang rode in loose formation, their horses dark with sweat, dust caking their coats like armor. They looked like a piece of the frontier had come alive to devour what remained. At the head rode Silas Kane, towering and still, dressed in a long duster the color of dried blood, black braids hanging from his shoulders like grim trophies. His face was shaded beneath a broad-brimmed hat, but his eyes, cold and unreadable, caught the morning light like a pair of coins unearthed from a grave. They paused just before the first trap. Clara tensed. 1 rider moved forward, scanning the ground. He never saw the tripwire. The sapling snapped upright with a crack, yanking a snare taut around his legs. His horse reared, screamed, and tumbled back into the rocks, pinning him with a sickening crunch. The others drew weapons. A second trap triggered. 2 canvas-covered pits opened under a cluster of hooves. More screams. Chaos broke the ranks. Shouting, firing blindly. Someone lit a torch and hurled it into the canyon mouth, expecting a rush of bodies. But there was only the wind. Clara moved through the upper ledges, like a ghost. Her old Comanche training hadn't dulled. Bare feet on sandstone, silent, patient. She aimed her revolver and fired once. A rider dropped from his saddle before he could light the fuse on a dynamite bundle. Below, Kane raised a hand, and the gunfire stopped like a switch had been thrown. "Whoever you are," he called, his voice low and smooth, "you've bought yourself 5 minutes. Use them." His gaze scanned the cliffs, but didn't linger. He turned his horse and gestured for his men to dismount and advance on foot. Smarter than Clara expected. No wild charge. No wasted meat. These weren't just cutthroats. These were tacticians with bloodlust. She didn't fire again. The traps had done their job. Now the canyon would narrow, and every turn would cost Kane's gang another piece of their momentum. Clara retreated deeper into the stone maze, moving toward the last switch point, where Sheriff Tom waited. The sheriff crouched behind a jagged boulder, hands clutched around a repeater rifle. His breath steamed in the cool shade, nerves visible in every motion. "They're coming," Clara whispered as she approached. He nodded. "We ready. Ready as we'll ever be." Beside him crouched three others. Lyle, the deputy, face pale but jaw clenched tight. Old Elias, the blacksmith, whose trembling hands had still built half the traps Clara used, and young Esther Wilkes, no older than 16, eyes burning with something close to fury. Her brother had died the night the Richter place burned. She hadn't cried once. "On my mark," Clara said. "They'll round the stone gate in twos. Wait until they pass the arch, then shoot for the knees." The gang came slowly, cautious now, rifles raised, eyes scanning every shadow. The traps had taught them respect. The first two men passed the arch. Now, gunfire ripped through the canyon. Both riders dropped, screaming. One shot through the hip, the other in the thigh. Behind them, the gang shouted and scattered, scrambling for cover that didn't exist. Esther took another shot, clipped a man through the gut. Her hands barely shook. Kane's voice boomed again. "Keep moving. They're few. Kill the witch." Clara flinched. He knew, or guessed well. Another explosion rocked the canyon. Elias' firebomb, tossed from above. The dry brush caught instantly, creating a brief wall of flame that turned the canyon into an oven. "Fall back," Clara shouted. "Next pass." They moved quickly through a hidden crevice, leading to the higher ridge. Clara knew every inch of this land. She'd drawn it, memorized it, hunted in it. Kane's gang might be bloodthirsty, but they were strangers to these bones. As they reached the next ridge, a bullet clipped Lyle's shoulder. He went down hard, groaning. Clara dragged him behind a slab of rock, her fingers already probing the wound. "Clean through. You'll live." "Hell of a war," he gasped. "It's not a war," she said grimly. "Not yet." Below, the gang regrouped. Kane stood among the firelight, his duster swirling like smoke. He didn't shout this time. He just pointed to the cliff walls. Clara's heart sank. They were going to climb, flank the ridge. Sheriff Tom swore. "They're adapting too damn fast." Clara's eyes flicked upward to where the hawks still circled. "They're trying to turn the trap on us," she said. "So we set a new one." Tom frowned. "We don't have much left." "We don't need much. We just need them to follow." "And go where?" Clara stared north, past the last bend of the canyon. Her voice dropped low. "To Dustwind." The sheriff's mouth opened, then closed. "They'll burn it to the ground." "Not if we make the town a weapon." For a long second, neither moved. Then Tom grunted, rose to his feet, and helped Lyle stand. "We make our last stand in the dirt that spit you out," he said. Clara looked at the trail below, where shadows gathered again. "They cast me out," she said, "but I'll still be their shield." By sundown, Dustwind shimmered with a silence it hadn't known in decades. Curtains drawn, windows shuttered, livestock corralled behind overturned wagons and makeshift barricades. The town square, once a slow-moving center of gossip, trade, and church bells, was now a battlefield in disguise. Oil lamps glowed low in the saloon windows, but no music played. Only the dry groan of wind rattling through the bones of a place preparing to survive or vanish. Clara moved through the shadows like she had never left, like she had never been driven out. Her coat was torn, streaked with ash and blood, and her revolver hung low on her hip. She gave quiet orders, her voice clipped and precise. Folks listened. Even those who once spat when she passed now leaned in close, eager to hear how best to live through the night. Sheriff Tom stood with her in the middle of the square, shotgun in one hand, lantern in the other. "They'll come from the canyon trail. No other way in without scaling the cliffs." Clara nodded. "We bottleneck them between the smithy and the church. We've braced the support beams, set fire traps along the walk. If they rush, they burn. If they scatter, we flank. What about the children? They're already in the root cellars, she said. And I posted Esther with 2 rifles. That girl doesn't miss. Tom let out a low breath. Never thought we'd be taking orders from a woman we once exiled. You didn't exile me, Clara replied, eyes scanning the horizon. You just didn't stop them. He flinched, but said nothing. In the distance, the hawk cried once, sharp and final. Clara's spine stiffened. They're here. Kane's gang came like a storm riding dusk. Dust kicked up behind them, red with the last of the light, their silhouettes like demons on horseback. At their head, Silas Kane no longer bothered with caution. He knew his prey was cornered. Knew fear would do the work before bullets were ever fired. But Dustwind did not cower. The first shots rang out from the rooftops. Clara had hidden 5 marksmen in the eaves above the saloon and mercantile, and they fired with precision. 2 riders went down before the rest dismounted, using horses as shields, returning fire. Fire traps ignited beneath their boots. Buried jars of kerosene set alight by fuses Clara had laid herself. Screams cut through the dry air as flames leapt from boardwalks to saddlebags. Kane strode forward through the fire, untouched, revolvers drawn, calm as Judgment Day. His gang scattered behind him, trying to find shelter, but the town was a cage now, and Clara held the key. She dropped from the balcony of the old hotel, landing with a roll, gun in hand. Her first shot took out a man hiding behind the water trough. Her second missed, intentionally. It drew Kane's eyes. Their gazes locked. She didn't wait. Clara moved fast, weaving between fences, crates, overturned wagons. Kane followed, his own gun barking twice. Splinters burst from a wall beside her head. She ducked behind the smithy, just as Tom stepped out, unloading both barrels into another rider that had gotten too close. The townsfolk fought like they had nothing left to lose, because they didn't. Old Elias used a sledgehammer like a war club. Lyle, arm bandaged, shouted positions and reloaded for those with shaking hands. Even Preacher Moses stood on the church steps, wielding a pistol and shouting scripture. Kane pushed through it all like death incarnate. He wasn't just a killer. He was an idea. Ruthless, slow, inevitable. Clara knew she couldn't outshoot him. She had to outthink him. She sprinted toward the church, drawing Kane into the narrow gap between the general store and the bank, where the ground had been rigged. As she passed the porch, she kicked a loose board. A hidden line snapped. Kane heard it too late. The blast threw him back, his hat spinning off into the dirt, coat aflame. He rolled once, twice, came to a stop with a low grunt, half buried in rubble. One hand reached for his revolver. Clara walked toward him, boots crunching glass. You were right, he coughed. You're no outlaw. You're a weapon. She stood over him, eyes hard. You made me one. His revolver lifted slightly. Her foot came down on his wrist, pinning it to the dirt. You could have run, he said. I did. Once. She raised her revolver and pulled the trigger. Silence followed, stretching long and wide across the town square. Smoke drifted upward, curling like ghosts. Then slowly, townsfolk began to emerge. Faces pale, soot-streaked, eyes wide. Tom approached Clara, dragging a makeshift bandage around his leg. Is it done? She nodded. For now. Elias stepped forward, his hammer still dripping blood. They'll tell stories of this night. They'd better, Clara muttered, holstering her weapon. Otherwise, it wasn't worth the pain. Esther climbed down from the rooftop, a new bruise blooming across her cheek, but she smiled like someone who'd tasted justice. A hush fell over the square as the preacher stepped forward. We owe you, he said. No, Clara replied, turning away. You owe the ones who stayed, who fought. I just gave you a fighting chance. You saved us. I gave you time. You saved yourselves. As she walked past the saloon, past the homes that once locked their doors against her, something shifted. A child peeked from behind her mother's skirt. A nod. A whispered thank you. Then another. Clara kept walking, her hawk soaring low overhead, wings slicing the sky like a blade. The wind carried the smell of smoke and blood, but under it, faint and fragile, was the scent of rain. For the first time in years, Dustwind might bloom again. And they would remember, when the riders came, it was the woman they cast out who stood between them and ruin, the shield they never saw coming.